You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for September 3rd, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where it sounds like I've been gargling with a bottle of scotch because I'm nursing a cold, so we're going to keep it kind of short today. It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal. Hello, Blue Gal.
Hey, Driftglass, I hope you're feeling better.
I'm at the tail end, but that's when it goes for the throat.
That's when the fire hose turns on. Yeah,
so
it's all coming out. And
I'm drying out. I'm drying out, and it's drying everything out, including my pipes. So you'll excuse me today.
Well, today we're going to do some no fair remembering stuff to help us gain some perspective and understand how far the Republican Party has fallen.
That sounds like fun. Let's do that.
First up, this is a public service announcement, and it's old-time radio, so bear with the sound quality. But this is a PSA from September 1st, 1975.
I can't give my child everything, and that really hurts. But he knows I love him, and I'm doing everything I can, like making sure he's healthy. I got this booklet at my food stamp office with all kinds of nutrition tips, like what I should do about snacking and ways I can cut down on too much sugar, fat, and salt. The booklet really helps choose foods for good health and nutrition. That's real important.
In the food stamp program, we know the job of mom isn't easy, but we're here to help. Our free nutrition booklet will help you choose the foods that are best for your kids. We've even included some simple recipes for good, healthy eating. For a free copy, stop by your local food stamp office today for the love of your kids.
I wish I could give my son more, but we're going to be just fine.
A public service message from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Ad Council.
For those of you keeping score at home, that was 49 years ago, during the brutal socialist regimes of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford.
Communists, really. They were
really commies, but you know.
Monsters.
That was pre-Limbaugh America, pre-Gingrich, pre-Fox News. Before Reagan began running for office, bashing welfare queens and young bucks eating T-bone steaks by cheating the hard-working American taxpayer, Driftglass. This is before Reagan and Tony Scalia and Robert Bohr conspired to kill the Fairness Doctrine and spawn the hate radio industry.
So, in the interest of historical accuracy, we went digging through the archives, and this is from a 1976 edition of the Congressional Quarterly Almanac, the CQ Almanac. Now, take note of the fact that this is taking place during a presidential election year 48 years ago, when people were debating, substantive issues, and reporters were reporting on those substantive issues. Quote, Congress overrides Ford's jobs bill veto. Showing some muscle amid election year debate over unemployment. Congress, July 22nd, overrode President Ford's veto of a public works jobs bill, the centerpiece of a proposed Democratic economic recovery program since early 1975. In February, the Senate sustained a veto of a more expensive version of the bill by 3 votes. The override was assured after the Senate moved July 21st to set aside the second veto by a, take note, 73-24 vote. That's the margin by which this thing passed. 8 more than the 2/3 majority required. The House, which had shown unassailable support for the bill since the beginning, came up with 39 extra votes and overrode 310-96 the following day. Congress overrode the veto with the help of a substantial number of Republicans who deserted the president's position. They included Senate Assistant Minority Leader Robert P. Griffin, Republican of Michigan, who cited continuing unemployment problems in his home state, unquote. Imagine what kind of healthcare system we would have. Imagine what kind of unemployment system we would have if Republicans would just do the right thing and side with Democrats for the good of America. But we don't do that anymore.
We don't have jobs bills like that anymore. It has to be supporting some industry, or we have to couch it in a different kind of language. They just called it a jobs bill.
Yeah.
In 1976.
A couple of episodes back, we talked about how the big concern was there wouldn't be enough government jobs created or invented, temporary jobs created to allow the people being laid off from the auto industry to continue to draw a paycheck. And that was the debate. Not should we, but how many should we? You see, way back during the before time, the great divide in American politics wasn't necessarily between Democrats and Republicans. It was often between the White House and the Congress.
Yep. Jump ahead 48 years to another presidential election year, and this is what the Republican candidate is talking about. This is from a real relic of the 1990s that, for the most part, is still desperate to pretend that the politics of 1976 are still the politics of today. This is from PBS's Washington Week, where they read poll numbers at you and still step very daintily around the reeking shit pile that is Donald Trump by using words like controversial.
Yeah.
And we don't like that word.
No.
Yet this week it got so bad that even this milquetoast down the middle PBS show had to call attention to how fucked up everything has become.
Playing. I want to talk about, I'll call it plainly, a double standard that we have in this campaign. We're sitting here parsing, as we should, what the Democratic nominee for president says in an interview, how she answers questions about a whole range of subjects. Meanwhile, this is what Donald Trump had to say this week.
Groceries, food has gone up at levels that nobody's ever seen before. We've never seen anything like it, 50, 60, 70%. You take a look at bacon and some of these products, and some people don't eat bacon anymore. And we are going to get the energy prices down. When we get energy down, this was caused by their horrible energy wind. They want wind all over the place. But when it doesn't blow, we have a little problem.
Here's the thing. I'll make this observation. I'll own it. If Kamala Harris went from bacon to wind in her interview with Dana Bash, she would this morning not be, the next morning, she would not be the nominee of the Democratic Party. That would have been a very, very strange, people would have been like, what is going on? Do we just have an absurdly low standard now for the things that Donald Trump says and does?
But the rest of this brief conversation was more or less, what you gonna do? He's nuts. Everyone knows he's nuts, but his supporters love that he's nuts. And now let's move on to the next story.
Yep.
Moving on.
Uh-huh.
As if to underline that point in Sharpie permanent marker, here is a direct quote from Donald Trump's extended bull goose loony tirade at a Moms for Liberty freak show. Quote, but the transgender thing is an incredible thing. Your kid goes to school and comes home a few days later with an operation. The school decides what's going to happen with your child, and many of these childs 15 years later say, what the hell happened? Who did this to me?
Yeah, that's the Republican nominee for president. And yet, to misquote Buckaroo Banzai, you could pulverize the New York fucking Times article of this event, sift through it like breadcrumbs for the rest of your natural life, and never, ever find a hint that Trump had ever said any such thing. Mm-hmm. Instead, the Times coverage, New York fucking Times coverage, was a little something like this. Quote, conservative moms charmed by Trump would rather avoid his misogyny. Yeah. Former President Donald J. Trump spoke at a convention of the Moms for Liberty in Washington. There were trays of mini cupcakes and macaroons. That's the first line of the story. Cupcakes and mini macaroons. There were squadrons of helicopter moms, just like your mom, buzzed off of white wine. The excited women were wandering around the basement of a Marriott in downtown Washington, waiting for former President Donald J. Trump to show. It was the Joyful Warriors Summit, thrown by a bunch of agitated parents known as Moms for Liberty, a conservative activist group that was founded during the COVID pandemic, unquote. The Times article goes on to characterize Moms for Liberty admiration for Adolf Hitler as some sort of kooky mix-up. That's just crazy stuff that happens sometimes, with people. Quote, the Moms for Liberty can get a bit carried away. One of their local chapters once quoted Adolf Hitler. Quote, he alone who owns the youth gains the future, unquote. And then issued an apology disavowing the Fuhrer, unquote. The hostess was asked about the screenshot Trump shared on his shitty social media platform, an image of Ms. Harris and Hillary Clinton appended with commentary from another user with a reference to oral sex. And here's what was said. Quote, asked what she thought about Mr. Trump posting this, Ms. Justice stammered, what I think a lot of people say a lot of things, and we're focused on the issues that are hurting American voters, unquote. And she's right, Blue Gal. A lot of people do say a lot of things every day in the world. Yeah. People say things all the time.
The lady from Moms for Liberty who was moderating Donald Trump's appearance said that Moms for Liberty was a nonpartisan organization.
Sure.
And they're also a nonprofit organization. And she said that too.
Country and Western, Blue Gal. Yeah. Country and Western.
Yeah. And nobody stood up and screamed, but you get your funding from the Heritage Foundation.
The Nonpartisan Heritage Foundation.
The nonpartisan nonprofit Heritage Foundation, yes. And there's something wrong with the laws in this country that goes on.
There certainly is.
The money quote, however, from this organization, apart from the lying about the money, was from Eva Marie Scott, a financial advisor, and the article mentions mother of four from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Quote, but some Moms for Liberty acknowledge that they would prefer a little less crude talk from the man they hope will lead the nation once more. That was really tacky, said Eva Maria Scott. He needs to get off the tweets. That's very disrespectful, unquote.
Oh my God, she doesn't like the tweets, Blue Gal. She doesn't like the tweeting.
She doesn't like the tweeting? She never liked the tweeting, Driftglass.
Never liked the tweeting.
Even both of those times she voted for him before, she didn't like the tweeting.
I never liked the tweeting. He didn't have to do that.
So
he didn't have to go that far.
I'm just absolved from any responsibility for what I vote for. But you have to read all the way to the end to see how completely the New York fucking Times has given up doing political journalism. The article sounds very much like the sentiment at the end of Washington Week, a wistful meditation on how it doesn't matter what Trump does because his supporters are with him ride or die. And ain't it a shame that no one holds Trump accountable for anything? Quote, his campaign stop on Friday was a reminder that Mr. Trump often gets away with doing and saying things that would spell certain death for any other politician. He can denigrate veterans and then be celebrated by the military. He can brag about sexual assault, boast about walking in on Miss Universe contestants, and that's where the New York Times got it wrong. It's the Miss Teen USA.
Yeah.
Teens. Yes. Miss Universe contestants in a state of undress be found liable for sexual abuse by a jury of 6 men and 3 women, and still be celebrated as a protector and respecter of women and children by school board mothers concerned about a society they feel has become overly sexualized, unquote.
Yeah. Meanwhile, not too very much later, Donald Trump and his goon squad, you might have read somewhere in the newspaper, invaded Arlington National Cemetery, desecrating the graves of American soldiers and violating federal law. When one brave reporter questioned him about it, Trump fell apart completely.
Should your campaign have put out those videos and photos?
Well, we have a lot of people. We have people, TikTok people. We're leading the internet. That was the other thing. We're so far above her on the internet.
But on that hallowed ground, should they have put out the images of those? I don't know what the rules and regulations are. I don't know who did it. And it could have been them. It could have been the parents. It could have been somebody. It was your campaign's TikTok, though, that put out the video.
I really don't know anything about it. All I do is I stood there and I said, if you'd like to have a picture, we can have a picture. If somebody did it, this was a setup by the people in the administration that, Trump is coming to Arlington. That looks so bad for us.
And once again, the legacy media has no idea how to handle this. This is from Columbia Journalism Review. Quote, Trump's disastrous visit to Arlington was too much for the press to handle. Readers need to know that when you visit Arlington, you might not know exactly what you're supposed to do when confronted by those rows of headstones, but you damn sure know what you're not supposed to do. But the coverage this week left many readers with the impression that the whole thing might have been a bureaucratic mix-up or some tedious violation of protocol. It focused on bland horse race coverage so common during election season, rather than clearly stating what really took place, an egregious and willful violation of long-standing norms. What was missing from the coverage was a willingness to quickly and decisively state what a grievous insult the whole debacle was to the dignity of Arlington. The sacred had been profaned, unquote.
Yep.
In addition to that, and to lying about public schools performing sex change operations, Trump has also repeatedly lied about doctors executing babies and claiming that he has every right to interfere with elections. There's also this very credible story about Trump being bribed by the Egyptian government and his Attorney General Bill Barr covering the whole goddamn thing up that's just sitting there. And yet, you could crush the legacy media and sift through it like breadcrumbs for the rest of your natural life, and you would never, ever find any coverage of this madness and corruption anywhere near comparable to the legacy media's obsession with Hillary Clinton's emails. Like the SAPS computer software in the hunt for Red October.
See, sir, the SAPS software was originally written to look for seismic events. And I think when it gets confused, it kind of runs home to mama.
When the legacy media is confronted with a situation which its ideological software refuses to understand, it runs home to mama.
So when confronted with the fact that the real problem is that the Republican base are a cult that are out of their fucking minds, the legacy media software shorts out and it reverts to what it knows: both-siderism, horse race coverage, and blame the Democrats. The both-siderism is on display all around you every day, and you guys out there have gotten very good about spotting it and calling it out and calling it to our attention. We thank you for that.
Very much.
As for blaming Democrats, the New York fucking Times shows us the way with their 235,000th lecture about how it is Democrats who must behave better. This is from Nicholas Kristof, August 31st. This is just last weekend. Here's why we shouldn't demean Trump voters. Kristof cites Bill Clinton's insipid "be nicer to Republicans" remarks at the DNC, and then goes on like this, quote, "That's critical counsel because too often since 2016, the liberal impulse has been to demonize anyone at all sympathetic to Donald Trump as a racist and bigot. This has been politically foolish, for it's difficult to win votes from people you're disparaging. It has also seemed to me morally offensive, particularly when well-educated and successful elites are scorning disadvantaged working-class Americans who have been left behind economically and socially, and in many cases are dying young. They deserve empathy, not insults. By all means, denounce Trump, but don't stereotype and belittle the nearly half of Americans who have sided with him," unquote. Well, there's a couple tells here. One is 2016.
Yeah, since 2016.
Yeah, not talking about what was going on leading up to 2016. The other thing is, I happen to remember, Driftglass, boat races and boat regattas where people in Fort Lauderdale had houses in Fort Lauderdale and a boat and hung Trump flags from it. And we're doing just fine. Not all Trump supporters are low-class hillbilly elegy types.
No. However, flip side, since we are not rich and successful elites, we are free to disparage Republicans all we want, Blue Cal. So let's just lean into it, okay?
That's right. We're not coastal elites. That's true.
Right.
But look, Nick Kristof cannot remind us what's going on leading up to 2016. That's the before time. And any suggestion that the Republican Party is fucked because it's full of Republicans is absolutely forbidden by legacy media dogma and the New York Times policy.
Yeah, and right up until 2016 was the Obama administration, during which Barack Obama did everything Nick Kristof said Democrats should do.
Yep.
They mocked him, they disparaged him, they slandered him, they attacked him, they sabotaged his agenda, and then they nominated the king of the fucking birthers.
Yeah.
And that's something that Nick Kristof's tiny little elite brain cannot handle. So it must always be, Democrats need to behave better. Democrats, it has to be a Democratic problem.
The extent to which Donald Trump disparaged the parents of trans youth.
Oh, yeah.
And their teachers and their school administrators. And he does it all the time. And disparages mixed race people on the regular.
Yeah.
It's just that there's such a double standard.
The degree to which he mocked a reporter with disability, and he disparaged John McCain. The degree to which he's willing to say and do anything to his mob of mouth-breathing morons wearing "fuck your feelings" t-shirts.
Right.
So, Nick Kristof has been doing this for 20 years. He's been this way for 20 fucking years. I went back and looked at his Bush administration stuff, and it was pretty much the same kind of garbage. And they this is just right here an example of the legacy media cannot handle politics as it's practiced today. So they blow a fuse and they scurry back to what they know best, which is what got us here in the first place.
Yep.
And since aggressively not talking honestly about the biggest threat to American democracy has apparently become the hill the legacy media wants to die on, legacy media reporting is doomed to becoming increasingly detached and bizarre and Nick Kristofian until the whole thing collapses completely.
Yeah.
For more on this story, we will now turn to Margaret Sullivan, who was the former media columnist for the Washington Post and, believe it or not, the 5th public editor of the New York Times. She was the one at the Times advocating for the readers.
And I'm going to read this to save Driftglass's throat.
Bless your heart. I do appreciate that, darling.
Quote, an ugly case of false balance in the New York Times. The mainstream media is still getting it wrong about Trump. I once asked Jill Abramson, the former top editor of the New York Times, to name the best reporters she had ever encountered. I recall she mentioned her friend and co-author Jane Mayer, definitely on my list too, and a few others. Mayer's book, Dark Money, about the Koch brothers, is a classic of investigative reporting. Another one was James Risen, the renowned investigative reporter formerly of the New York Times and later at The Intercept. I heard from Risen a few days ago. I pay particular attention to him as a former Times man himself and a journalist of integrity. At first, I thought this was a parody, Risen told me. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Even more unfortunately, the lack of judgment it displays is all too common in the Times and throughout big journalism as mainstream media covers Donald Trump's campaign for president. Quote, Harris and Trump have housing ideas, economists have doubts, is the headline of the story he was angered by. If you pay attention to the epidemic of false equivalence in the media, equalizing the unequal for the sake of looking fair, you might have had a sense of what was coming. The story takes seriously Trump's plan for the mass deportation of immigrants as part of his supposed affordable housing agenda. Here's some both sidesing for you as the paper of record describes Harris's tax cuts to spur construction and grants to first-time homebuyers and Trump's deportation scheme. Quote, their two visions of how to solve Americans' affordable housing shortage have little in common, but they do share one quality. Both have drawn skepticism from outside economists. The story notes that experts are particularly skeptical about Trump's idea, but the story's framing and its headline certainly equate the two. There's only one reason I disagree with Risen's reaction. He wrote, this story is unbelievable. I wish. Stories like this run rampant in the Times and far beyond. It matters more in the Times because even in this supposed post-media era, the country's biggest newspaper still sets the tone and wields a great deal of influence. And of course, the Times has tremendous resources, a huge newsroom, and the ability to hire the best in the business. But its politics coverage often seems broken and clueless, or even blatantly pro-Trump. There's so much of this false balance nonsense in the Times that there's a Twitter X account devoted to mocking it called the New York Times Pitch Bot.
Woohoo!
Yep. And what's worse, they don't seem to want to change. Editors and reporters, with a few exceptions, really don't see the problem as they normalize Trump. Nor do they appear to listen to valid criticism. They may not even be aware of it or may think, well, when both sides are mad at us, we must be doing it right. Now that's absolutely the Chuck Todd excuse.
Oh, yeah. 100% meet the press.
Yeah, meet the press. Yeah. Maybe they simply fear being labeled liberal.
Yeah.
Unquote.
God forbid.
Very, very, very good that someone of Margaret Sullivan's caliber
yes.
would put, I mean, this is something we've been saying for over a decade.
Yeah.
But
been writing about for 20 years and podcasting about for 14.
Even people like Margaret Sullivan are now sitting up and taking notice.
Like James Risen, yes.
And James Risen thinking they can't believe it. And she's saying, oh, yeah, I can.
Yeah. Well, this is like, I've analogized this before to Italians in hell in Dante's Inferno.
Right.
Or Volkswagens. During the pandemic, we caught up a lot on the Rockford Files and Mission Impossible. And you start to notice there's an awful lot of Volkswagens in those shows, background cars. And once you start seeing them, you see them everywhere. Once you start seeing the both sides do it lie, you see it everywhere. You realize that it's completely ubiquitous, which is why it's invisible. So this idea of editors and reporters, with a few exceptions, really don't see the problem as they normalize Trump is certainly necessary, but it is absolutely not sufficient.
Yeah.
Because every day on social media, you will find people who I follow with very impressive current and former journalism titles, using what I would refer to as very non-church language to describe the state of the media, their business. There's an emeritus scholar at the American Enterprise Institute who's also a contributing editor for The Atlantic. There's an ex-editor of the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, my two hometown newspapers when I lived in Chicago. There's a host of primetime program. There's the host, of a primetime program on MSNBC, who's also married to a Supreme Court contributor for ABC News. There's a journalist / public speaker / ex-Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NBC, CNN employee, right? Very impressive people with very impressive titles. And what all of them have in common is that as much as they rant about the legacy media generally on Twitter X, not one of them will contact anyone they might actually know at the Post or the Times or Politico and ask them directly why their media companies keep doing shit like this. Why? They know these people. These are their peers, their professional peers. They won't ask them the simple question, why are you doing this, and who specifically is setting the editorial direction and approving or rejecting these stories? Who's writing these goddamn headlines? And then, and I know this sounds crazy, what they could do with that information is, share it with the rest of us. In fact, there used to be a word for this kind of activity, and that word was journalism. And that's the end of this podcast for today.
Because he's tired and not feeling good.
My throat's starting to go, and I got more podcasting to do this week, Blue Gal.
You're on two. Well, let's talk about that, because we were on the Bill Show yesterday.
We were on the Bill Show yesterday.
That'll be out. That'll be out later today, I think.
Right.
Watch our Twitter X, or if it comes out, I'll put a link below from this podcast to the Bill Shows, because that was a fun show. And then I'm doing knitting podcast tomorrow. Yep. And we're doing our regular show on Thursday. And then what are you doing on Friday? You're doing
Matthew Sheffield has invited me to come on for 90 minutes to talk about whatever he wants to talk about. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm hoping I can be back to normal voce by then.
You will. You're climbing out. You're not at the bottom. You're climbing out.
It wasn't the COVID shot that did this to me, Blue Gal,
no,
not a death's door.
It was not last week's COVID shot that did this to you, I promise. Yeah.
Okay. Because I got the 5G and it feels great.
Oh, how's the 5G feeling? Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Hey, feel free to write us at our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go Postal Unions! Letter on the air unless you say otherwise. Hope all the union members out there had a wonderful Labor Day. Hal Sparks and Boston Bryan watched Donald Trump play golf. It was hilarious. On Labor Day. Not go to a union hall.
No.
Not meet with voters.
No.
You know, the traditional start of the campaign season, he was playing golf all day.
Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he?
I don't think, he doesn't want to be president, really.
He doesn't want to run for president, that's for sure.
No.
Don't forget our gourmet coffee guidelines. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage or a soothing glass of hot tea with lemon, that would be just great because that's good for my throat. For yourself, buy one for us. This is not a charity. This is our job. And damn it, whether it's raining or snowing or wedding day or cold, we are here for you. So if you can spare $5 a month, please spare $5 a month at patreon.com/ProLeftPod. Please share our show. That's a really difficult sentence to say, by the way, when you have a cold. Please share our show on social media. Tricky that, but I got it. And if you love this podcast, please get someone else to listen as well. And thank you very much for doing that.
Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Look, how the Internet Kitties would love it if Tim Walz would come by and talk woodworking, take on the whole pocket hole versus biscuit joints controversy.
It's a controversy, Driftglass.
It's a big one. There's a lot of very ugly feelings on both sides. And I think Tim can bring us all together. Yeah. Tim can unite the country. I believe he can.
Let's think about living. Think about living. Let's think about loving. Think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying and the fellow with the switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.